Hi, I'm Chris Katulka, the host of the Friends of Israel Today radio program and also the editorial writer for Israel My Glory magazine. Today we have a special guest, Ty Perry. Ty is the assistant to the director of North American Ministries, and we're going to be looking at a column that Ty has been producing since the beginning of 2023 in Israel My Glory, and it's all about anti-Semitism. This is important because anti-Semitism is on the rise, and Ty's going to highlight why this article that he's writing in Israel My Glory is incredibly important. Ty, great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Hey, so you've been writing excellent articles since the beginning of 2023, a new column that we've put in Israel My Glory, all about anti-Semitism. And this has become important to Friends of Israel because anti-Semitism is actually on the rise. It seems like every time that we turn the news on, there's something related to some type of anti-Semitism going on, not just in the United States, but around the world. Maybe you want to share with us why it's important for our audience, our listeners, our readers to see and hear what's going on with anti-Semitism in the world.
Yeah, I think it's important for Christians to know that there's suffering around the world, there's persecution of believers around the world. All that's vital for us to understand. But since Israel, the Jewish people, are the apple of God's eye, and we're called to be a blessing to them, not a curse, then we need to be cognizant of attacks on those people. And I think particularly as the church has traditionally, at least in the last couple centuries, we've been some of the best friends that the Jewish community has. We need to be more aware of what they're facing so that we can come in and meet the needs that they have.
I like where you went there. You had talked about the fact within the past few years, especially in the last few decades even, the church has shown really a biblical approach to understanding how to love Israel and the Jewish people. Maybe you can highlight that a little bit. You know, why is it that the church all of a sudden has started to show love and support and standing up against anti-Semitism?
Mm-hmm. I think fundamentally it's biblical, that as they come to the text, the more interaction the believer has with the text and coming at it from a literal hermeneutic, they're going to come away with some type of a love for the Jewish people to some extent. I think since 1948, with the reestablishment of Israel, it confirmed everything that Bible students have known, or at least thought would probably happen as they've studied the scriptures. And so since 1948, with the reestablishment of Israel, there's this awakening among evangelical believers to support the nation of Israel. You see the 67 Six-Day War, when it looked like Israel might not be in existence anymore because of the Arab armies, and yet they miraculously defeat all of the Arab armies around them. That was a real clear point in the Christian-Jewish relationship, particularly as it concerns Israel, where Christians said there's something more going on here than just a nation that the UN started or allowed to start. The Lord is behind this.
So when you're looking at the church, you're seeing there's both a kind of it's a double-edged sword here. You're seeing both an increase in love and support for Israel and the Jewish people based on what the Bible teaches. But then at the same time, there's also, the church has that ugly history of anti-Semitism that can kind of somehow find its way even into modern messages, if you will, and speaking to modern audiences. Could you maybe highlight a little bit about that?
Yeah, so historically, Christian, and I say that broadly, Christendom has been one of the foremost persecutors of the Jewish people, and that's that contradiction and a paradox. But in recent years, what we've seen is it's not so much among Christians, it's not so much a religious animosity against the Jewish people as much as it gets into kind of a social animosity, social anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. So they're not necessarily Christians who are saying the Jewish people killed Christ, we need to do harm to them. But they may say, we don't like, there's some Jewish people doing things that we don't like, and therefore it's brought into apply to all Jewish people. So we see that in the church.
Yeah, maybe like they control the media, or they have all the money, tropes, or things like that. Yeah, right. Those are anti-Semitic tropes. Can we back up for a minute, too? Because I always like to highlight this for our listeners on the radio or whenever I'm speaking. I always like to highlight what anti-Semitism is. Because I once, many years ago, saw a statistic that showed that not many people even understand what that term means. So maybe as we're kind of having a conversation about why your article is so important in Israel, My Glory, and we even highlight that it's a column about anti-Semitism, maybe this is a good moment for people to hear, what is anti-Semitism?
I wish there was just a defined way of answering that. There's actually debate around the definition of anti-Semitism, but fundamentally, it's a hatred of the Jewish people. It's a view of the Jewish people that is negative, and it manifests itself differently. Mm-hmm. So you have political anti-Semitism, you have theologically motivated anti-Semitism, which is what you're seeing in the Muslim world, but it's fundamentally a hatred of the Jewish people with a variety of manifestations.
Now, and I think that's a really important, I always like to just say to people, when I say anti-Semitism, I mean it's hatred toward the Jewish people. And like you said, that can work its way out in many different ways. And one of the ways that we're seeing this today is Israel is at war right now. Right. Israel is at war with Hamas. And then just recently, Iran attacked Israel, which means Israel's at war with Iran in some ways through its proxies and even directly now, as they have to deal with that. And what's interesting is Israel is attempting to protect itself even after October 7th, which is anti-Semitism. It was a direct attack against the innocent Jewish lives that were living in Israel from Hamas. Even with that happening, there are voices that are rising up, and they have this anti-Semitic sound to them. They have an anti-Semitic way of thinking. And what's fascinating to me is a lot of people will say this. They'll say, oh, I'm not anti-Semitic. I just hate Israel, which is another word, anti-Zionism, or to be anti-Zionistic. You know, how do you deal with that, Ty? Can you say, I hate Israel, but I love Jewish people, or I like Jewish people? How do you wrestle with that?
Well, again, you'll have a variety of opinions on this, but I view it this way. Is there theoretically a line between being opposed to the state of Israel and being anti-Semitic? Maybe in theory. If you believe, though, that if you say, I disagree with a lot of Israeli policies, that's not anti-Semitic. If that was anti-Semitic, most Israelis are anti-Semitic. Yeah. Most Jewish people are anti-Semitic. But when it comes to anti-Zionism, where we have this view that Israel has no right to exist as a Jewish state, that's where we cross the line, because Israel is held to a double standard, a standard that no other nation in the world is held to. And so it's very curious that people will say, I don't hate Jewish people, I just hate Israel. Essentially what they're saying is, I don't hate individual Jewish people, I just hate it when they have power.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And I've thought about this a lot. You know, there's so many issues that happen in the Middle East. Even countries like Lebanon and Syria, these countries were essentially, the modern countries were founded in the early 1900s, right, almost leading up to the mid-1900s, around the time that the State of Israel was founded. And it's just so interesting to me how nobody, is screaming for the destruction of Syria, or no one is screaming for the destruction of Lebanon or the people within. The only state that they have issue with is the Jewish state. And I always think that the common denominator there is the fact that it's controlled, or governed is probably a better word, governed by Jewish people. Right. When you look at what's going on in the Middle East, they're the ones that everyone's pointing their finger at, but they're the only Jewish state, even though 500,000 Syrians have died, and there have been wars throughout the Sudan civil wars. Millions of people have died, and yet Israel responds to an attack, and they are the ones to blame. Is that because the lowest common denominator is that they're Jewish, and is that anti-Semitic?
I think it definitely is. I think you also can't discount the spiritual foundation of all of this, because you have conflicts all over the world. We don't have protests against Russia right now. Even though Putin is doing some horrible things to the Ukrainians. Assad, under the Assad regime, his slaughter of his own people. You don't see protest on college campuses. It's specifically the Jewish people. And so when you look at that and you see this complicated history, yes, but yet it's a very, very simple equation here, that the Hamas has come in and they have attacked the Jewish people, and as soon as the Jewish people respond, they're now the bad guys. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense or any logic to that. And so then you have to start thinking, okay, is there a spiritual element to this? And we see that throughout the scriptures, that Satan hates the Jewish people. And so as the ruler of this world at this time, he is ultimately the one behind all of this anti-Semitism.
You know, I was just speaking at a conference, one of our Friends of Israel conferences, Prophecy Up Close, and I saw this young woman in her 20s that was there, and we got to talking, and she told me that she lived for something like 15 years or 10 years in Israel. Her parents were doing work over there, and so she studied at Hebrew University, and she got a degree, and she knows fluent Hebrew, and she had left Israel just before October 7th. And after we were done our conference, she came up to me, she says, I have a question for you that I don't have an answer to. And bear in mind, this is someone who's lived in Israel for a long time. She has Israeli friends. She speaks Hebrew, the whole thing. She says, everybody calls what happened on October 7th and that anti-Semitism, they call it spiritual. But she says, sometimes I feel like that waters down what actually is going on. You know, she goes, she's a Christian, and she says, I believe it's spiritual. But if you say that to an Israeli who's suffering, it just feels like it kind of goes, it's spiritual, you know? I told her, I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are on this. I told her, I understand what you're saying, because for her, it was deeper. Her friends suffered.
Right.
I told her, I think the answer is to tell their stories. You know, she goes, how do I combat this? How do I say, yes, it is spiritual, but also this? And I was saying, you know, the thing you want to do is tell their stories. And you want to put them in their shoes, because she's right. If you just say it's spiritual, you've kind of chalked it up to going, oh, it's somewhere up there in the heavens. When really, I'm telling her, what you should do is tell their story. It will ground both the spiritual component of what's going on and also the reality on the ground. Yeah. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are, especially as you're telling the stories.
So I think I understand where she's coming from. I think that when you understand it as a spiritual conflict, though, it takes on even more significance, because this is not just a political battle happening here. It's a massive spiritual thing happening that has obviously very physical manifestation. But I do think it's important to tell the stories about how does that conflict bear out. What are the Jewish people facing? I have a friend, her name is Sivan, and she was in Sderot the night of the day of the attack on October 7th. And she told me her story of what it was like to hear Hamas members outside of her door. She's inside with her, I think it was a 7-month-old baby and her elderly mother. That puts flesh on that story. And it also, I think, for me, as I consider what this is, that it is a spiritual battle, understanding that it being spiritual doesn't mean it's not real, that this is how it's impacting real people. And so I think those together, that's probably the best way to approach that.
And that's what I was trying to say is you can't ignore the spiritual component of anti-Semitism. It's something that routes all the way back to the moment God called Abraham, right. Because God gave a commission to Abraham, through you all the families of the earth will be blessed. Well, that's enough for Satan to go, I'm targeting these people until they're done with. Because if there is no Israel, if there is no Jewish people, then we don't have to deal with God's redemptive plan at all. And so I was trying to tell her that it is a spiritual thing, but telling the story is what puts people in their shoes so that you can feel that. I want to move really quickly, because as we're talking about stories, all we see on the news today is college campuses. They have become a hotbed of anti-Semitism. Why is that? Why are college campuses the places that seem to target of anti-Semitism, or the bullseye of anti-Semitism?
Sure. Well, I think, again, there's a number of reasons that contribute to it. But historically, the college campus has been a place for the free exchange of ideas, which is, I think, what it should be in the West. That's something we've championed. Unfortunately, it's been hijacked to be a stage or a platform for the most radical ideas, while at the same time suppressing any counter-protest of any substance. And so when you think of anti-Semitism, an anti-Israel sentiment. I think that's a major component. The other component is that there is a growing movement of anti-Western thought, anti-Judeo-Christian worldview, and so Israel is at the apex of that.
Yeah.
And so these college campuses are going to have protests that coalesce around Israel because it represents everything that the campus has been promoting and targeting as something that they want to eliminate.
Yeah, and that's fascinating to me because it's what you're saying is that, number one, they're learning. It almost seems like there's a sense of activism that's being taught from college campuses. Right. And you even see it not just in the, you go, oh, well, that's because the teachers are teaching this. But it almost seems to be working its way all the way up to the upper echelons of the leadership and staff at these high Ivy League schools, right. Where they're standing before Congress and they could not just call out anti-Semitism for what it is. Why do you think it's not only in the communication of how teachers are speaking to students who are, I think, activating them to fulfill these anti-Semitic tropes and to speak out against Israel? But then at the same time, you'd think that the leadership would say, enough, students, let's return order. But it seems like everything's out of control.
Yeah, I think it's in a way a case of the tail wagging the dog. The donors are the ones you'd think that these college presidents would want to appease. And a lot of the donors to Harvard and Columbia, they are Jewish people who are very much opposed to what has happened. But they're not focused on the donors. They're focused on the students. And if they really don't want to come up against the students and their views, and so they kind of get in line behind that. And so I think that's why you're seeing these college presidents not be able to make a bold statement that this is anti-Semitism. I also think you have a lack of moral clarity. Once you reject truth, which is what they've done at a lot of these Ivy League schools, once you reject the idea of truth and that it's knowable, then it becomes very hard to make any moral judgments, even ones that seem crystal clear, like anti-Semitism. Those judgments aren't able to be made as clearly.
Yeah, and that becomes the issue of where I think modern anti-Semitism and modern anti-Zionism, which I think are one and the same, the hatred of Israel and the hatred of the Jewish people, they go hand in hand. I think it comes exactly from what you're talking about, is that there is a truth that is being taught, and it's that if you're the victim, then you are the one who's being oppressed.
Yes.
And so victimhood is one of those interesting ones, and there's this thought that's going throughout college campuses, and I even think a thought in some media outlets as well, that Israel is the oppressor of the Palestinians, or the oppressor of, look at what they're doing over there. And instead of looking at the history and finding the truth, they just listen to what their professor says or what the media says in that little soundbite. And then all of a sudden it enacts, an activism to get involved. When really, when they say things like from the river to the sea, they don't even realize what river they're talking about, right, or what sea they're talking about, which just shows that there's an anti-Semitism that's not even built on facts. It's just built on an emotion that's being communicated through social media, through their professors, wherever the case might be. And that's why I think your articles are incredibly important, Ty.
Well, thank you. It's a privilege to write them.
Now, listen, this is your opportunity. If you're tuning in for the first time and you're just finding out about Ty's articles on anti-Semitism, this is a great opportunity for you to turn and to actually find his articles, which are in every issue of Israel My Glory. These articles will inform you on the anti-Semitism that is happening not just in our country, which is on the rise, but globally. It will connect you with what's going on with anti-Semitism happening in Europe, happening on college campuses, even the anti-Semitism coming out of the Middle East. Ty tackles some of the difficult issues and really makes us think about how we as Christians can get involved to fight anti-Semitism and to push back and to be praying for Israel and the Jewish people. Ty, is there any last words that you want to give for our listeners and readers of Israel My Glory?
Well, first of all, I hope you read the articles to become informed about what our Jewish friends are facing, and then don't let it stop there. Don't just read these and close the magazine and be done. At the very least, pray for the Jewish people. Pray that the anti-Semitism they're facing might be at least restrained, but then also look for opportunities to show your Jewish friends and neighbors that you care, and you do so as a believer in the Lord Jesus.
That's great. Hey, Ty, thanks so much for being a part of this program, and also for being a writer for Israel My Glory.
Privilege. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks so much for watching this edition of Israel My Glory in Depth. Now listen, if you're not a subscriber to Israel My Glory, now is your opportunity. If you go to israelmyglory.org/subscribe, you can receive a 1-year free subscription to our award-winning Christian magazine, Israel My Glory, if you've never subscribed for it before. You can get a print edition, or you can get our digital edition, which will put more than 50 years of Israel My Glory content right at your fingertips. Again, visit israelmyglory.org/subscribe.